with a half hour, I didn't know if that felt like too much time or.
I think there'll be plenty to talk about.
Okay.
Oh, we're not worried about that.
Do you feel sacrificial by being here all alone?
I thought you could use some company. We are live, and we have Karen Hart from Vermont League of Cities and Towns. Good morning. It is Friday, January 27th, and Senate Economic Development General Housing and General Affairs. Karen.
Thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity to testify on this bill. And the committee room looks, I know I was in here before, but the committee room looks so different on Zoom than it does
Oh,
in
really?
real life.
Oh, they have angles. It looks like,
Like, Senator, you're like way over there.
I know.
Everyone thinks we're in this like
My committee, I
palatial
arranged to have the fruit bowl in front of me.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, you do look like you're in Florida or something with all that food.
I know. Senator Chittenden is keeping us well fed.
You just all have to eat it.
So we are really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this issue. Clearly, housing is essentially a crisis in every town in the state. You heard some really compelling stories yesterday morning. I was watching about people's efforts to find housing. And we've heard those same stories. We've heard about people turning down jobs and going back to wherever they thought they were moving from because they couldn't find housing. There was a individual who was taking a job in the town of Windsor last year who actually had to just decline in the end and because he couldn't find housing. We do think we need to take a holistic approach to the housing effort. We know we need to amend zoning to reduce barriers to housing development. We also need to address party status and permitting and address substantial impediments to housing development imposed by Act 250. Permits required by the Agency of Natural Resources and VTrans, and as you've been looking at over the last couple of years, cost of land and labor, availability and cost of materials, bank lending practices, and more. All of that contributes to the housing crisis across the country and in Vermont. And what we are hearing is that the problem is more acute in Vermont than it is in other places. I want you to remember that land use planning and permitting are core responsibilities that the voters in more than 253 cities, towns, and villages have granted to their municipal governments. According to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, there are 253 municipalities with adopted plans. 242 of those are current plans and confirmed by the Regional Commission. There are 207 municipalities with adopted zoning or subdivision bylaws. I will send you my testimony afterwards. I always find spelling mistakes when I'm reading it.
So sorry, Karen, what was that number again?
So 207 municipalities have adopted zoning or subdivision bylaws. 253 have adopted plans. 242 of those are current plans and confirmed by the regional commissions. So there are a few towns out there that have expired plans that are where you have to renew them every 8 years. So they're working on renewals to their.
So I thought we have 247 towns or
So we have cities, towns, and villages, because there's
so they're
some
all
villages that
some
have
right.
municipal plans. So there are villages around the state that
That's
actually.
separate.
Yeah.
Sadly, I don't
Yeah, yeah, it's 247 now,
Yeah,
because of the Essex Junction City.
right.
So this is a tremendous body of work undertaken by dedicated and volunteer planning commissions, zoning boards of adjustment, and development review boards, emphasis on volunteer. They're trying to do the right thing for their communities, and they're trying to implement the many requirements in planning and zoning statutes that have accumulated over the years I'm the vice chair of my planning commission in Moortown. Lynn Zakoff, who works with me, is the chair of her planning commission in Brookfield. So we sort of live this in small communities. The workload's huge, it's complex, it's frequently controversial, and it's stressful. And as a result, many volunteers at the local level are calling it quits. We have a real crisis in terms of volunteer local officials.
I
I
got
think-
accused of killing people's grandmothers when I was on the planning commission.
Oh, our
That was
executive
when I
director
wanted to
had
put
been
the grain
accused.
union over, yeah.
There's
Hopefully
always-
that hasn't happened to you.
There's always a new
It gets
twist.
very
It does.
heated.
People say stuff like that about parking issues. So yeah, things get very emotional.
They do, they do. So I want to move to the actual bill, but I would also recommend that you hear from the Mayor's Coalition on housing
We
issues.
have Mayor Lot coming in next week.
Oh, you do? Excellent, excellent. So they put together a legislative agenda, which I actually sent to Scott yesterday, I believe. And housing is really front and center on that agenda. And in terms of moving to the bill, we are concerned that the first 5 sections of the draft bill mandate how municipalities permit housing developments, and that will eliminate any kind of discretion at the local level for planning commissions, zoning administrators, and development review boards. I understand that that might actually be the full-on intent of the legislation, but municipalities are not one size fits all. And what may be reasonable in one community and necessary, for instance, in the cities where the mayors are working, is not necessarily going to work in smaller communities and may result in exacerbated problems. And again, I want to emphasize that we understand that zoning needs to change. We did have one suggestion that did, oh, and I should also say, we had several conversations with Representative Bongartz regarding his bill. And you and Senator Bongartz came into our December VLCT board meeting where I think they were fairly clear that they had some issues with Senator Bongartz's draft bill.
I think it was constructive that we heard
Yeah,
really specific feedback and
right.
the need to focus on other parts of the law that.
Right. And I think, Senator, you definitely heard that recommendation. I'm not sure that Senator Bongartz's bill reflects that because it really doesn't address Act 250. So parking spaces, I did want to just take that as an example. The prohibition on more than one parking space per dwelling unit.
And not a prohibition, but a restriction on requiring it at the town level. A developer could.
You
more than
could
one.
justify, oh, the
Well,
developer
I mean,
could,
Burlington
yes.
is thinking about parking maximums right now, so I don't
Right.
wanna, I
Right,
don't wanna, you know.
Right. But exactly to
communicate that.
the point. So in a smaller, more rural community where there's more space, it might be fine to just have one parking space per dwelling unit. In Montpelier, where parking's always been an issue and where Act 250 denied a parking garage, and where you'd have to move your cars to clear snow, one parking space per dwelling unit would be really problematic.
We hear that. And I'm
Yeah.
a good champion for raising that issue on the committee.
Parking was when I was accused of killing grass.
Oh, there was parking, and that actually.
Well, it was
surprised-
putting in a parking lot and yeah.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah, so you.
It's very close to my heart.
Right.
We
We hear you.
understand that.
So I also need to comment on emergency shelters, and I think what I'm going to say here is going to be wildly unpopular.
Okay,
Um,
good preface.
Yes. So adding emergency shelters to the list of facilities that may only be regulated with respect to the limitations section of Title 24 will exacerbate an already unmanageable reality at the local level. And I need to explain that a bit. We don't have a good definition of emergency shelter. We're not sure which agencies regulate and manage emergency shelters. Are there staff there to provide support services? Are emergency shelters hotels where people are lodged on a temporary basis? Are they encampments? The governor's budget calls for $26 million for emergency housing, including general assistance in adverse weather conditions to assure every Vermonter has a place to go for the night. The general assistance in adverse weather conditions is, our understanding is that's essentially the hotels where people are lodged. At the local level, the hotel program puts local governments in impossible situations where police and emergency medical service calls to hotels have skyrocketed since the COVID pandemic.
Do you have
descended.
numbers?
I
Or is it
do
just
have
saying
numbers. I
skyrocketed?
don't
Okay.
have them written down. I have a few municipalities who are very reluctant to have their names attached to these comments because they're definitely not PC.
Even if it's de-identified, I think numbers
Yeah.
would be helpful. 'Cause
So in one community where there are 3 hotels, they had about 200 calls to the hotels pre-pandemic,
Mhm.
and they had more than 1,300 in the last year.
Okay.
In Rutland City, there are 8 hotels, and they have statistics about the number of calls to those hotels, not only police, but also emergency medical services. Because there are no, what we hear is there are no support services around the hotels.
Right.
And there's not staff there.
I'm not denying that that takes up a lot of our emergency service calls. Our responsibility is still to look regionally at, would those emergency calls come from elsewhere? Would they be coming from a shop or a bookstore where someone had a,
So,
episode? I mean, we
yeah,
have to,
so
or a street corner.
a couple of the cities make that distinction.
Okay.
But I think the essential message is that you're asking police and emergency medical services 911 calls to take the place of the support services that are present in the nonprofits and the Good Samaritans and the
I
COGS
hear you
and the-
defining
yeah.
shelter so that
Yes,
there's
I
a
think that's
management.
what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
Yeah.
Good Samaritan has staff.
Right,
There's a
Maybe
stark difference in
Yes.
terms of calls.
right.
Yeah,
Oh,
but the
yeah.
hotels are just
In the middle,
hotels.
yeah.
They're-
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
They're sometimes during COVID, there was, I think, more support, more supervision, and I think now
Right.
we'll hear. But I think what I'm hearing you say is you want a definition of, a better
We
definition.
need
of
a
emergency shelter.
definition. We need some ability to regulate those kinds of facilities, and they need to be located in places where they are proximate to support services and those kinds of things. In just one more example, I'm told that in Berlin, at the Good Samaritan Haven, they've had maybe 30 calls over the last year, and they've had more than 400 to the hotel that's hosting people, because there's no other place to turn.
That's a helpful distinction.
And the
Yeah.
hotel is
Things are
across the
skyrocketing.
street.
Yeah.
from-
Yeah.
Yeah. So we don't disagree. I just, that is really helpful.
Yeah, we will put that data together.
The 300 to 1,300 is pretty big data if you can, I mean, that's
Yeah, yeah.
pretty stark.
Hotels generally, unless somebody has a heart attack, you don't get a lot of hotels.
well, it's
to-
a hotel, it's housing. I mean, the state is doing a very good job of providing the housing and the shelter, and that's what that's what the focus is.
Okay. And some of these suggestions might also come with some support if you have ideas for a definition
Yeah.
and all these changes. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate
We're happy to work
that.
with you.
Yeah. I would just mention the requirements in section 5 for reporting to the Department of Housing and Community Development. We
Mhm.
just need to be mindful of the fact that not all towns have access to high-speed internet or.
You never let us forget it, and we appreciate
We're working on it. We're working on it.
that.
I was
There
gonna say,
you are.
that is, that is
I
gonna
live
help
in a
less
little
and less
pocket
every
of
time.
an internet desert, so I'm very
There's
well
all
aware.
those-
But
You,
We need to get the money, we had money originally so that 3 or 4 neighbors could
Yeah.
get there. I think it was up to a $2,000 grant, but between them, if you got 10 neighbors, we did East Bear Swamp, one of the Bear Swamp roads that
Oh,
way.
interesting,
So
interesting.
you all got your,
Yeah, well, the communications union districts, I think, are doing an epic job, and they are getting out there, but it does take time.
but it takes an amazing amount of time before you can
Yeah,
string.
it also takes a fair bit of expertise to file reports to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. It's not an easy thing to do, having done it, so.
but you were our poster child. 'Cause I remember all through COVID, the beginning particularly, when you were driving to your elementary school or wherever
It
you were
was the
driving, to
elementary school.
be on your phone.
Oh, to, yeah,
Yeah,
tune in.
yeah, at recess, which was always fun. Oh, that's-
No,
I had a
It's great.
teacher who was teaching her class from the Mordecai General Store.
Oh, yeah,
She's down parked in the parking lot at the hot
Yeah.
spot.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where
Yeah.
Karen was.
Yeah. Let's see, we do appreciate your proposing, granting discretion to a town to allow the zoning administrator to approve minor subdivisions. That's been a, issue in a number of towns, because if you have a subdivision, advice of, some attorneys will say that you already have that authority to determine what's a minor subdivision and allow the zoning administrator to make those decisions, which are then appealed to the Development Review Board. But some attorneys say that that discretion is not allowed in the statute. So making it clear would be very helpful. And also, and I think this is really key to the whole housing discussion. Thank you for eliminating the section of Chapter 117 Municipal Planning and Zoning that eliminates the any 10 people may appeal a zoning decision. And if you get rid of that section, these are the people who would still be able to appeal. A person owning title to the property, a host municipality, an adjoining municipality or solid waste district, a person in the immediate neighborhood who can demonstrate a physical or environmental impact on that person's interest, any department or administrative subdivision of the state owning any interest in property, and the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So what you are really doing when you eliminate that any 10-person section is you're focusing the appeal rights on those entities and people that would actually be affected by the decision. We've done a lot of reading over the last couple of years around the whole issue of appeals, and the fact that we discussed this the other day, and the fact that people who have a vested interest who are in the neighborhood, of course, they're going to come to the public hearings and they're going to get involved and they're going to try and appeal. The people who might be there if the units were built, who would like to live there, they don't have that same vested interest. And so there's really not any way to represent that interest, need, priority in the appeal process. I don't know what you do about that. There have been articles in Governing Magazine around that whole issue,
Right.
in the New York Times in 7 days, but it is something that I think we need to be mindful of.
The voice of the future beneficiaries.
Right, right.
Even
How do we represent?
like our witness yesterday was living in a hotel for 7 months. to know which towns in the radius of commute from there you need to go talk to. You don't.
If you see any great ideas in governing magazine, let us know. But I think, a lot of towns are creating affordable housing task forces and commissions, and
Yeah,
you have
Right.
the housing director in Burlington who used to go to the same meetings, and so
and you have the YIMBY.
YIMBY groups are
Groups, which, I really like that idea, but still, you have to have the time and the wherewithal and the, and
And you
the
have to have the party,
dedication really
Yeah.
to
you have to
go.
have the party status.
Yeah,
I mean, yeah. So I think it's an interesting question. How do we represent the voice of future beneficiaries? I think that's a good question.
Well, it'd be a good question for an intern as a project. To
It might
take a look
be.
at NCSL and all the other sources that might say, tell us how others are dealing with this problem, if at all.
there's Peregrine.
Yes, where is Peregrine when we need him?
Peregrine's
to
working
meet him?
on other things.
Okay, well,
But
Let's
Noted.
unleash him on this.
but it is, that's a classic intern project.
You have one. I don't.
okay.
Go forth and do
Okay,
brilliantly.
We had a
Keep your mouth shut for
conversation
now.
yesterday with UVM, College of Arts and Sciences, and they really want to get interns involved in these kinds of issues in municipal. So I might suggest that one to them.
perfect.
With respect to Act 250, we're very concerned that the bill does not sufficiently revise Act 250 jurisdiction of residential and mixed-use developments. Act 250 often gives project opponents multiple opportunities to appeal and to take several bites at the apple and ultimately to reduce the size of proposed housing developments. We've heard numerous stories of developers, both private and nonprofit, who have restricted the size of their developments to below 10 units or whatever the number of units is that gets you to Act 250 jurisdiction, so they don't need to go through that process. We think it's very important to eliminate Act 250 jurisdiction in designated downtowns, new town centers, neighborhood development areas, and growth centers. We need to define the state standards for administration of Act 250 criteria, and you could have a system whereby municipalities certify that they are taking on that responsibility and not have the double permitting at the local level in Act 250. You will hear from the Mayor's Coalition very strong advocacy around eliminating Act 250 jurisdiction. And then we think that you really need to eliminate altogether the language in Act 250 that establishes jurisdiction based on construction of housing projects constructed or maintained on attractive tracts of land owned or controlled by a person within radius of 5 miles and within any continuous period of 5 years. There really is not any reason that we can think of that you would penalize a person who's developing housing just because they're having more than one development within 5 miles of each other or within 5 years. I mean, what we want is for them to build housing.
Right.
And you've seen some of these sections start to take shape in our bill, right?
We have, they
Not the
seem
full
to,
exemption, but
they seem to all be somewhat qualified and not, but we think you really just need to eliminate that provision. Representative Sims has a bill in, I think it's H111, with 50 co-sponsors at this point that would eliminate the Act 250 jurisdiction in designated downtowns and so forth, and would also address the language about 5 miles, 5 years, 10 units. We strongly support the section 15 regarding connections to municipal water and wastewater. We've been working on that issue for how long, Senator?
Very long time.
Over 25 years.
Right, very long. We almost actually secured that change to the statute last year. It was sort of nip and tuck, but in the end, it didn't pass.
We
But
worked
the-
on it pretty hard.
Yeah, you did. And the Agency of Natural Resources is supportive of that change at this point, so. And then we thank you for including the language that would enact the project-based tax increment financing districts. I understand.
Our mini
that-
tips, our project.
Mini tips, that there's some consideration of maybe having that in a separate bill, which, we still supported over
Right,
there,
okay.
right?
Yeah, I've told finance that may be coming, the trade-off, maybe we trade off the big TIFs. Because the towns that are really in a position to do them have done them
Right,
and go to the smaller TIFs. And if we can keep the impact on the ed fund or even reduce it,
yeah,
then I think we've got a good chance.
and we think that would be very workable.
Okay, good.
You also had an extension in here, I think, for Hartford, which also has a separate bill.
It's there
extending,
and I'm
And Barry
working
City.
on a separate bill for Barry City,
Oh,
so
okay.
they can go through. And if you've got language, I don't have to get the same language from Barry City.
I think it's finally been sorted out that someone's introducing Barry, right, separately.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
gonna say, you're looking. at
Oh,
the
okay.
Washington.
I just,
That's
I emailed the manager and clerk yesterday and said, if you can
Yeah,
send me some details, but if you have it drafted up, that would,
I don't have it drafted up, but we could
I'll
get it drafted
I'll
up
get
really
it in.
quickly. And Carol Doss is definitely the person that's sort of
Yeah.
taking the lead on that for Barry.
As in all things with Barry.
Because that
Derek
could,
Carroll.
that could just tie this bill down or get it
That's- yeah.
sent
Yeah,
to finance. Where if there's an
Right.
issue with TIFs, and there always is,
Mhm.
right.
it could get bogged down.
Or finally, finance could see the light.
But this committee will still advocate.
Yes.
Well, I want to speak
Well,
for
half
three
this
members of
committee is
finance.
on that committee,
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
It is economic.
So many tips may be the future of tips is what you're saying.
I think in Vermont, yeah.
I think they may be. I mean, particularly coupled with the auditors.
The auditor's coming in next week.
Yeah.
To talk about Berlin.
We
Oh,
just
yeah.
have 2 more minutes, Kara.
Oh,
You're right.
wow,
the
see what
time
happens
flew
to
by.
half an hour?
It's true.
And we also support your proposals in the bill to fund the variety of housing programs. That's not just an addendum. Thank you very much for doing that. And we're happy to come back or answer other questions or have conversations or if you need.
So mobile
A few
home,
minutes for.
all that other stuff. You're very
Yes, the mobile
welcome.
homes,
You like all the
missing no
additional-
mill, the BHIP, and long-range plan for hotels.
I just have a couple questions. Do you have any towns right now that are making it illegal for people to sleep in their cars?
I have not heard that.
Okay.
No.
We're just in a homelessness crisis, and I
Right.
just wanted to make sure you weren't starting to hear of trends toward criminalizing.
I've not heard
Okay.
that.
Well, it always crops up. when we
I
have these-
I read an article about it in another state just recently. I don't remember where, but I don't think that we have those kinds of efforts in Vermont. I think cities are pretty careful
Okay.
around those issues.
Another issue brewing, and I will use a similar preface to yours about unpopular opinion. Potentially, I don't want to poke bears prematurely, but one thing, we're starting to hear a couple things, right? You have planning commissions doing great work. We have great plans. And then there can be appeals to votes where the majority, right? Sometimes it's not the individual going and advocating at a meeting, but it's the collective community saying, yes, I want my grandkids to be able to live here. I want more housing. I want to
Yeah,
enact the plan we said, and there's still appeals possible after a vote is what we're starting to hear.
so you're talking about the after a vote on a particular
On a particular
project
project, exactly.
decision.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many opportunities for appeal, so a zoning administrator can make a decision, or the development review board can make a decision, and then it gets appealed. With housing projects of any size, it's almost always appealed. And then the DRB will, like affirm its decision or address the ZA's, the zoning administrator's decision. And then you can go to environmental court. And then,
Do their appeals get narrowed if there's been a vote to say that the majority of the
Oh,
community?
you can always petition for a re-vote, if on any vote, if, at least in
yeah.
a
we're not
lot of the
really
town,
sure.
I don't know about
Okay.
towns, but in cities with charters,
Okay.
if. 'cause
Well,
that-
yes, if you're adopting a zoning bylaw, for instance, we just had a municipal planning grant to rewrite our zoning bylaws to be more hospitable to housing, and we've done everything that's in this bill. But one other comment was making accessory dwelling units a public building is gonna really kind of kill people's interest in building accessory dwelling units.
That's not in here.
Public building.
Oh, that's in Representative Baumgart's bill.
Yeah, that.
If it's in
Okay.
here,
Yeah, I think it is in ours, but I
Okay.
think
I think
we
that
need to
we
tweak.
haven't
it.
talked about that, and that
It is a
definitely
public
needs to
building.
be
What does it
addressed.
mean, though?
like a fair
Yeah.
housing kind
It's,
of accommodation.
so what the language would do, I think it is in your bill, what the language would do is, say that an accessory dwelling unit is a public building for purposes of fire and safety
Oh,
Well,
code.
it has
And
to
be that.
fire and, well, it isn't right now, and so,
But-
so you have your single family house, and you're gonna build, the accessory dwelling unit on the side of
You're
it.
gonna do an extension.
That's gonna be a public building, so
But
I,
I think we need discussion of that,
Yeah,
because
We can
if you,
discuss that.
We are
does-
making it
adds
possible
to
for it
the
to be-
cost. If you
Right.
have to sprinkle it, which you do in publicly rented buildings, or if you have to put in sprinklers
Yeah.
and you have an old farmhouse,
Right.
it's.
it's an issue.
Yeah, the
Okay,
Montpelier had a sprinkling requirement
Okay.
for any new construction or any major
right,
rehab.
over a
Okay.
certain percent of.
It can add thousands of dollars depending on if you have to replumb your entire house
Mhm.
to do the sprinkles, and then you get into water pressure, and if there's enough to meet the code.
There is a balancing act between
There
it
is.
being publicly available for public rent and still being in a home or on a lot. So I mean, I think it's a balancing act that we have to both protect the public and make it.
For a lot of, I just want to say out loud on Friday, because next week we're gonna try to find time to start, hearing other issues, hearing how we're all feeling about the bill. I've asked Senator Harrison to just really dig into these sections and take
Okay.
feedback and bring future iterations forward. So, Senator Clark.
I'd like an update on something we did last year, which is I'm heartsick that the registry didn't go through, as you all know. But I do want an update on how the town health officers and the inspectors situation is working out. You may not want to give it today, you may not be prepared to give it
Don't
today,
have time for that.
but I would love to know how that is working out as we add new inspectors and as they go statewide.
I don't believe there's been any rules written yet by the Division of Public Safety around.
So we are having them in, so we need to.
Yes, so that's a nice quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, thank
Thank
you
you
for
so
the
much. We
time.
probably will have you back in, but we'll also hope that, in other conversations, you can share suggestions. Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the things I'm struggling with is when you talk about an accessory dwelling unit, when that was first put out, it was like a grandmother apartment,
Right.
which means it's the room over the garage or the room on the
Mhm.
third floor that grandma lives in, and I put a bathroom in, and maybe she's got a microwave and a mini fridge.
Right.
When you talk about a rental unit,
Yeah,
as a public building. That means I now have to build a fire escape for grandma to the third floor.
I will say a lot of this came up because we started putting public money into
Yes.
ADUs as a housing
Correct.
solution. So I do think we'll need to look at the definition of ADU. That's come up a lot, and we have one, but I would like us all to look at it and know that we feel good about it. Zeke, thanks for your patience.
No worries, thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me, everybody. So I'm Zeke Davison. I'm the COO of Summit Properties. We're the largest private developer of affordable and mixed income communities here in Vermont. We've developed
Thank
about,
you.
no, you're welcome. It's our pleasure. We've developed over 700 rental homes in Rutland County, Addison County, Caledonia County, and Chittenden County. We've also developed another 500 rental homes in New Hampshire and upstate New York. And on our affordable housing property management side, we manage all of our own units, but also Forever North, COTS in the Burlington area, and some other private affordable housing developers.
Over what time frame? The 700 units?
700 units was dating back to our founders in the 80s, but about 100 of those have been brought online in the last 2 years. And the next part I was going to say, we're also under development right now on 94 units in South Burlington. 71 of those permanently affordable, and 20 would be for people who are coming out of homelessness or at risk of homelessness through coordinated entry. And that project was, kind of represents one of the most ambitious, most efficient, quick to close in this ARPA funded affordable housing priority era that we're in. Big thanks to VHFA. That funding stack included ARPA funds from VHCB, a CDBG award, local ARPA funding. It was a true testament to what ambitious projects can be in today's funding world, which you guys have all approved over the last couple of years. Our next project, that one's under construction now. The next one we're working through permitting on. It's a smart growth, mixed income, 200 home project in Middlebury. It's the one that the governor mentioned in his opening address to all of you. And this bill could have a really beneficial impact on that. The removal of the population-based caps for priority housing projects, section 12, page 14 of this bill, would save hundreds of thousands of dollars, 6 to 12 months in permitting, and reduce the uncertainty and risk that the appeals process of Act 250 causes. So the project started as a partnership between us and Middlebury College. They came to us a few years ago saying we are in desperate need for workforce housing. And we were able to bring Middlebury's resources and their urgency for housing in the town of Middlebury and together to purchase what was the perfect smart growth lot in the town of Middlebury. And the project started as a partnership with us in the college, but it's grown to include the community. We've held public info sessions, took feedback, all of it positive and encouraging about density. The town of Middlebury, we're working with them to jointly file some municipal applications, CRRP, CDBG, NBRC. The Porter Hospital, the other large employer in the town of Middlebury, is supportive and on board. The National Bank of Middlebury, the Addison County Economic Development Corp listed this as their #1 priority on their 2023 priority project list. We submitted our first application to VHFA's, we supported the first application to VHFA's Missing Middle home ownership program that you all championed and passed in the last legislative session. We're going through town zoning right now, and we're going through a robust environmental review that's required of all of our federal and state funding resources. So that sort of sets the scene as a town, even before this project, and unrelated to what we're proposing. Middlebury's done all the work the state has asked of it. It applied for and received a neighborhood development area designation after a 2-year bylaw modernization project. It's got robust zoning bylaws that include, that key in on areas for smart growth, this parcel included, that were debated and adopted in a truly democratic process in the town of Middlebury. And the need for affordable housing, I think it's sort of a known that we all know, but it's particularly acute in Middlebury. Middlebury has I think the 6th highest jobs to homes ratio in the state of Vermont. That's behind a couple of the ski towns, Stratton and Killington also. Meaning that this need is now, the need is acute, and it really needs ambitious solutions. So after all of these tailwinds, after all of this effort by the town, the project will be subject to Act 250 because we're proposing more than 75 units in a town of a population between 6,000 and 10,000 people. Middlebury is a town of 9,200. the result of that, addition of hundreds of thousands of dollars, fees and consultants, we know that. Delay of 6 to 9 months at minimum after going through the town zoning process. We'll then have to submit an Act 250 application, and then, as we're all talking about, the risk of appeal by one objector, and that's uncertainty, risk, and potentially additional time and cost to what just the basics of applying through Act 250. So we're trying to match the ambition of this project with the housing crisis, with the need in Middlebury, but Act 250 is a genuine risk and a genuine barrier. And for really this reason, impactful affordable housing developments rarely happen outside of Chittenden County. So of the 10 towns that have a population over 10,000, and that's where there is no unit cap for towns over 10,000, 6 of those are in Chittenden County. The other 4 are Rutland, Bennington, Brattleboro, and Hartford. The population-based cap regime that we currently have, which you guys are proposing to eliminate, and I'm here to support, forces developers outside of Chittenden County to either scale down projects or incur that risk. And it is duplicative in these designated areas. As I talked about, we're going through the environmental review. We're going through a 3-step zoning process that's been approved by a state, received the neighborhood designation. And this is after the democratic process of the planning, the coding, and the town development review board. So dense smart growth development really is the answer to affordable housing. You guys have managed to watch at 1.5 speed, so it's a little nicer to be slower here, but all of your testimony so far this week. And you've heard it, right?
Do that.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice.
You can double time it too, and it really goes.
YouTube wouldn't let me do that, but 1.5 was enough to get the point. Yeah, but you've heard it this week. We're in a housing crisis. We want to preserve Vermont's countryside and ag lands. We want to reduce transportation emissions. We want walkable communities. We want to fight homelessness, and we want to champion social and economic justice. The population-based caps really are disincentivizing us accomplishing all those and really utilizing the smart growth areas. Our plan is to charge forward. It's what we do. It's our mission. It's what the town wants. It's what the employers in Addison County want. We'll take that risk, and we're also lucky to have an employer like Middlebury sort of come to the table and added another tailwind. If we did take the path of least resistance, we proposed 74 units, as many developers understandably would if 75 and over triggers Act 250 in towns between 6,000 and 10,000. We'd scale down the project, not accomplish the density, and the perfect smart growth parcel in Middlebury would go underutilized. The homes are needed, and the result would be the next woodlands, the next field are going to end up being developed. And in the meantime, people will continue to drive mostly combustion engine cars from Rutland County, Chittenden County, or the best place to find affordable housing in Addison County, upstate New York. So I think this would be negating the good planning that the state has done, Jacob's office, that the legislature has done. I don't really think it achieves the intent of Act 250 either. So really removing the population-based caps, as this bill proposes, is going to have it's a big, the caps are a barrier on affordable housing, especially outside of Chittenden County. And I come to you kind of with one project today, so to sort of lay out the tangible impact those are having. It's been hard enough for decades because of land use rules and decisions and availability for people sort of not in my backyard voices to come in late in the game. And this is really an opportunity to take a scalpel to Act 250 to make a really big impact.
Maybe that's a hard word to use for those who for the rest of Act 250, but scalpel maybe.
We always
Precision.
try.
Precision.
Are there any energy features about your project that are worth discussing? Ways that you're trying to build a bridge into the future of the post-fossil fuel?
Yeah, and VHFA has been on the forefront of this. Anything multifamily buildings built with VHFA funding are achieve Efficiency Vermont's high performance track. So we'll certainly be looking at that. In talks now, geothermal, solar, plan to go all electric. There's a whole other conversation of that I think you guys touched on. Maybe it was with Gus earlier this week about stretch codes, the cost that creates,
Right.
and the policy decisions that we want to make around that. But yes, I mean, we're exploring every avenue, and all of our new construction does meet really high energy efficiency standards.
Okay, so the kind of standard that feels feasible and Rally of speed and efficiency for Vermont's high performance tracks.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, it's the gold standard, if you will. It's not the gold standard, I guess. You could always do passive house standard or something like that, but it is a policy decision that the agencies in the state have made on what our affordable housing that we intend to last 30 to 50 years, should be.
That's good. Any other questions?
In,
Yeah.
in an ideal world, Zeke, what's your timeline on the 200 additional units? When are you hoping to have them finished, by 26?
Act 250 or no Act 250?
I said in your
Both,
ideal
actually,
world.
yeah.
Our town zoning process that we've started with 3 parts, right? Sketch plan, preliminary plan, final plan. That process alone, best case scenario, will take us through the end of the summer. If we were to be able to secure in the meantime, we're going on the parallel track, trying to secure all the funding we possibly can. We could break ground this fall. If we knew we had to apply for Act 250, we would do it probably after the preliminary plan. So that would be maybe midsummer. That's 6 to 9 months baseline. So we're looking at, if there are no objectors, if there are no issues, if
The
there,
ideal world, you'd have it finished by the end of 24.
200 units, no, we would bring 50 to 100 units online middle of 24, end of 24. Without Act 250, that gets into 25. All 200 units, talking about absorption, availability of funding, we're into 25, 26.
Senator Brown.
The cost impact between Act 250 yes and Act 250 no, on a per unit basis, do you have a sense of what that might be?
Yeah, so I think that we can do the best case scenario, which is the filing fees, right? That's going to add at least $1,000 per unit, even on a really ambitious scale project like this. But the cost really starts to add up in duplicative consulting fees, legal fees if there is an objection, interest on construction costs if there's a delay, if you've already started, incurring pre-development expenses.
That's what I'm trying to do, is just get
I know.
a sense of the elements of cost that by adding Act 250 to a project like this, what does it mean when it comes for that individual home to be offered for sale? How much does the consumer have to pay extra for that? Because once you get an idea of that, then it becomes easier for us to evaluate the value of having it.
It totally depends on the size of the project. Right? If we were to do a 100-unit project, I mean, we know that the filing fees and our baseline going to be over $100,000. There's a cap, and being a priority housing project in an NDA, there are reductions in the filing fees. Again, don't quote me, I guess, but it's a few $1,000s.
Well, it would also be the time value.
So then what I was going to layer on is the time value, the risk, right? As soon as we start to put a premium.
How it is, do you know if anybody's actually tried to quantify anything like that? So
It is so variable. We've thought about trying to do it for because in anticipation of that exact question, and there are just so many variables. I would say best case scenario, we fly through Act 250. It's all perfect. We're doing 200 units. It's $1,500 to $2,000 per unit.
Yeah,
And
you said 1,000 a unit. It's now gone up.
No, that was just the final.
Oh, that's just.
yeah, right. And then that's not adding on like a risk premium and legal fees, things like that, if there is an appeal.
legal fees aren't free.
Right. And that's one thing I do want to comment there is this is we're doing affordable and workforce housing, right? I mean, we're that cost is borne by either the HFA, VHCB, the legislature through additional subsidy we're going to need to construct those units, or it's passed on to the consumer, it's passed on to the buyer or the renter to the extent that's even possible. And so one of those impacts ends up being, if you end up being too inefficient on building cost, the project just doesn't get done. And that's sort of why we've always focused on really high quality build, but really cost efficient. And that's what allows us to do these types of projects at scale.
Thank you so much. We have to. I always
I
worry
know,
you're
that's
last
okay.
to ask, raise your hand. Should I never-
No, I can ask questions later and I will have.
Yes, you can listen to us on single speed.
Yeah.
if you
Yes,
like.
I know. I'll
Stay
stay
here.
for a minute if you
We
don't
can
mind.
talk on the break.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
We have Joe, oh, good, okay, I didn't know if something was coming up. Jonah Richard on Zoom.
Hi, good morning, folks.
Hi. Good morning. Yeah, you just want to state your name for the record. I think everyone can hear you from the good morning. I heard that.
Yeah, my name's Jonah Richard. small scale developer and general contractor in Bradford.
Great. So yeah, just hoping you can share your thoughts on the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thank you all for inviting me today. This is a great opportunity, and appreciate you looping in some of the smaller developers. I know you're likely speaking with some of the larger scale folks, but it's nice to have a seat at the table as someone that develops smaller multifamily projects. So a little background on myself. As I mentioned, I'm a developer and general contractor at Bradford. I focus on small multifamily housing projects here between 2 and 20 units. I'm currently building a 9-unit mixed-use project, so retail and residential in Fairleigh, that kicked off in March of last year and set to wrap up this spring. So there's a lot of that goes into construction project, obviously, with risk, complexity, and uncertainty, and that's been exacerbated by interest rates and rising construction costs in the past few years. But there are two things from policy standpoint that I'd like to discuss here that I'm finding as end up being blockers for the small scale development work that I'm doing in Orange County. So the first is Act 250. I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about this. I just was listening into the gentleman beforehand speak to this as well. So not only does it affect larger projects, but it affects folks like myself doing smaller scale projects as well. So I'm not by no means an expert here. I'm just starting to get acquainted with the act, particularly because it's starting to affect the work that I'm doing. So for context, again, this 9-unit in Fairleigh that I'm doing is drawing to a close, and so I'm trying to figure out. I've been working on determining what my next project will be. I had a site picked out in Fairleigh. It's a small site, suitable for a 3-unit project, triplex. And I recently, in speaking with my attorney and some folks at the state, learned that if I went through with that project, it would trigger Act 250 due to the 10-5-5 rule. So 10 units in a 5-mile radius within 5 years would trigger Act 250 for me. And so that called into some questions on what that associated cost and risk would be on my standpoint. So there are a couple costs that I'm sure you all are aware of. So you have application fees, which add 7% to the project, or 0.7% to the project. You have attorney's fees. You have delays in construction. We need to hire experts to provide proof that we're meeting each of the 10 criteria, and these quickly add up to tens of thousands of dollars of costs for a small project, even such as a triplex, even before we know that the project can be built, right? And so also we have to take into account the time and cost going to zoning before going into Act 250, and quickly becomes untenable, the project, just due to the risk and upfront costs. And especially as a small scale developer, I don't have tens of thousands of dollars of capital to put at risk when that project might not go forward. So what this effectively meant for me is that I'm not going to pursue that triplex, and I have to find another project outside of that 5-mile radius, so that I don't have to bear the added weight and burden and cost of going through Act 250. And so just thinking through the implications, understood that Act 250 is meant to, on one hand, preserve the character of our great Vermont towns, but it actually seems to be undermining that goal by inhibiting small scale developers like myself from continuing to build small scale projects. And instead it guides me, like it or not, to pursuing larger scale projects that might not fit within the context of our smaller towns, just because that's the kind of project that can absorb the risk and cost of an Act 250 application. I heard some questions previously as well on the cost, actually getting some hard numbers on the cost of what Act 250 would add to a project. And I was just doing some back of the envelope math before I got on. And so a gentleman previously mentioned $1,000 to $2,000 range per unit for a large scale project. That increases on a per unit basis for someone like myself, where, call it a 6-unit project we're doing for $1 million. would add, $3,000 to $4,000 per unit in added costs. And what that translates to in the rental market, I do mostly rental projects, is about $50 a month in increase of rent that gets passed on to the consumer. The second policy thing I'd like to talk about is financing, particularly for small scale affordable housing projects. There's plenty of financing out there for market rate projects, conventional loans, et cetera. But when you move to the affordable realm, that gets really sparse for folks like myself. So for example, the 9-unit project I spoke about before in Fairleigh, that had no affordability subsidy. We did that with their market rate rents, and we went through conventional loan and equity programs to get the capital needed. And so as a result, what we're looking at is $1,300 a month for a studio and $1,700 a month for a 1-bedroom. And these are numbers that barely cover operating expenses, debt payments, and offer a slight marginal return to investors for putting in their capital. So put simply, I can't build affordable housing projects with conventional loan and loan programs without sacrificing quality. So I would need some sort of subsidy to bring those rents down to something more manageable for our lower or middle income brackets in town. So for the past 6 months, I've kind of been running an experiment, trying to find affordable housing programs that would work for projects of my scale. And so the project that I'm working on next is a 6-unit project outside of my 5-mile Act 250 range in Bradford, Vermont, where I currently live, that I'd like to make turn into 100% affordable housing. So the project's in great setting, downtown Bradford, highly walkable, close to shops, close to restaurants, close to, more importantly, jobs downtown. And the only other affordable housing projects in our town of 5,000 are these 2 21-unit projects, both set on the outskirts of town. So there's nothing really, not only is there a lack of affordable housing in town, but there's a lack of affordable housing in our core downtown area. So I've looked through a number of different programs. I won't get into them all. Vermont Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, which you all are familiar with, is good as a part of the capital stack, $50,000 per unit, but that is not enough nearly to cover the $175,000 per unit in construction costs that we have. And so that in and of itself will not work for a 100% affordable housing project. It can be a part of it, but it can't capture all of our need. There's the Upper Valley Loan Fund in our Upper Valley region that was established as a consortium of local employers looking to promote workforce housing. I applied for that, instantly rejected because my project does not meet the 30-unit threshold. And this is a common theme. A lot of these programs have thresholds of 25, 30, 40 units. And if you are below that, they can't work with you for whatever reason. Federal LIHTCs, so low-income housing tax credits, again, generally only reserved for larger scale programs. And then we have VHCB, which has their ARPA SFR funding, which also traditionally is used for larger scale projects, but I've been working with them the past 3 or 4 months. They've been willing to work with me on a small scale project, but this is kind of new territory for them, and it's unclear whether this project will work for that specific program. But net of the matter is, there's not a lot of funding opportunities for me to take advantage of to be able to offer 100% affordable housing in town here. And so I connected with Seth Leonard at VHFA, who we discussed this new missing middle income housing loan program that he's helping to draft. That would make a really big impact on projects of my scale, focused on 2 to 20 unit housing projects that could bridge the gap, when coupled with a program like VHIP, could actually allow us to deliver housing at, call it between 80 to 100% of AMI, so workforce housing. I know I only have 15 minutes, so I'll pause there. And if you folks have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Questions for Jonah?
Just a request, if you could send us your testimony, it'd be really helpful. Email it.
Absolutely, sure.
Okay, that'd be
Notice
great.
there's a delay.
Oh,
Just want to say
okay.
that out loud. People keep talking when there's silence.
Right, it's really interesting to hear from a small scale developer.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here and to understand the financing that you're looking at. Now, the Upper Valley Fund is interesting because that's a good effort from
It is.
locals. So have you talked to them about changing their parameters? I mean, they would have that ability to change their standards. Because they're not a bank or someone.
Yeah,
with-
yeah, so
No,
I have, like, I think the major issue, I think the real reason these programs do this is just because of administrative overhead. They can have a lot more impact with the limited budget that they have for administrative back end operations to do larger scale units than a bunch of smaller scale projects. And so I just don't think they're yet set up to be able to handle, 6 to 10 unit projects. That said, they did express interest in continuing the conversation. Hopefully that translates into something that either opens up that the pool of money to smaller scale developers, or creates a separate set of funding for projects of my size.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, just for a town, a 30-unit project in a town like Fairleigh or Bradford is gonna have a major impact and might get some more pushback. Infill in those kinds of towns are much likely to be in the 3, 4, 10,
Yes.
the smaller
Right.
projects, and that may be, because 100 units wouldn't be appropriate for those towns.
That's
Right.
exactly it.
And-
There's a lot of smaller scale infill lots that are available for development that can only fit, between 2 to 10 units. They can't handle the scale that a traditional affordable housing developer is going to need to deliver.
You mixed and you've got a small lot, you might be able to do 2, 3, 4 apartments above a retail, but not 20 without building a monster.
Exactly.
Yeah, and remember, one of the early partners on funding that Upper Valley Fund is the hospital, and you're right, their notion of solving this problem is 100 units in Lebanon. So, I mean, and infill is what we're
Lebanon,
gonna,
that might work.
yeah. Exactly. So,
That's in New
yeah,
Hampshire, so.
Thanks,
well, but it's for both sides.
Okay. Thanks so much, Jonah. If you don't mind me saying so, that's a beautiful space too. You have great taste, so.
Oh, my partner
Thank you for-
decorated it. Yeah, I can't take credit.
Yeah.
I'm aging the pine bureau behind him.
I know, we're admiring the antique.
I'm looking at the plan.
I was gonna plan to.
Anyway,
so
thank
much,
you for
Jonah.
Next time we'll get him in the office with the chair.
And you're welcome to stay on Zoom and listen, or, you might be busy, so. we
I have to
appreciate
duck
your
back out to the construction site. We're trying to wrap up, but I appreciate your time, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
So I know there was a request to switch order, but I am actually going to use my chair's prerogative to keep the order, just because we don't always have the Natural Resources Board in here, and I want to make sure we give you as much time as we need, and that might, sorry, Jacob, that might bring us right to 10:30, and we have you more often, and we've already had you at the
Okay.
chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, and our presentation is not, we've tried to keep it within the 15 minutes.
We have lots of questions
With
in
time
this
for-
room,
with
so.
time for questions.
Okay, well,
Yes.
I think, you're a missing link in this story, so we might have you in the chair for longer. And you can pull up a chair so that both of you,
Yeah.
however.
That
Great,
probably
yeah,
is a
let
good
me,
idea.
Yeah.
I hope I won't get any feedback here, but let me get the Zoom link open.
Or you could also send it to Scott, and Scott can run it for
I
you.
think
I
it's
just realized
actually
what a
nicer.
luxury it is.
It's
The
possible
witness
one of
can
those
walk
is good, so
behind
we're
you. You can't do that.
I don't want to have
There.
to. No worries.
Have a
Or am I gonna be
witness
right-
walk
right here?
behind you.
Yeah.
There's just
Right.
no room.
I know.
I'm used to, there's somebody coming, I have to pull right up.
Right, yeah. You might have like a bench or something for your. The chairs are gonna trip somebody.
we can join without video, right? That'd be the best way probably. Otherwise you
With
get
just
us twice,
slides.
right?
Yeah, we'll get
Yeah. We'll flip the slides.
Oh, okay, I misunderstood what you were saying, excuse me.
Oh,
Yeah, with him, I meant, yeah.
Yeah. Foot.
Okay, am I leaving this in your good hands, right?
Yeah, that's brave of you.
Oh, I think we've only met Peter a few times.
yeah, we would love to have, I mean, you're not often in our committee, you know, so.
Right.
Welcome, we have one new senator.
Yeah.
Well, I know
Wendy
Sabina from her
Nice
last
to meet
life.
you. I recognize the title in Dollar Falls.
Oh, great.
So that was nice to see that connection, but, are you ready for me all to begin?
Yeah, as
Okay.
long as you're good with
Yeah.
your
One
technology.
second on the
Okay.
tech side of things, sorry to. Okay, so I'll just do a share screen and we should be good to go. Make it
Get rid of our
for
comments.
everybody,
Perfect.
yeah. We can make it big as well.
While I will say, I think for the general watching public, it's better if people do bring their own slides in, because Scott can do other things and not have to keep advancing the slides, so I
So
appreciate
look okay for
this.
you? Works out good.
Good for me, good on that side.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We all know that housing is at a crisis point in Vermont, and it's heartening to see all of us working together to move it forward. I want to thank you for inviting us today and for letting us be part of this conversation. There are lots and lots of different parts to this. And I am Sabina Haskell. I'm the chair of the Natural Resources Board. I've been here 13 months in this role. I've had many other roles around the state, which I won't bore you with, but I've recognized a lot of folks.
We've seen you in very different capacities.
That's right, that's right. And with me today is Pete Gill, our new executive director at the Natural Resources Board. And I'm going to let you say a few words about yourself before we jump.
Good morning,
right in.
senators, and thanks for having us. So yeah, Pete Gill just started as the executive director. I've been here for 2 months with a large caveat that prior to that, I was with the Natural Resources Board as Associate General Counsel for about 8 years, so I have some background in Act 250. But I did have this little interlude, 5 years at Norwich University, and so I've got a lot of education law crammed in my head as well. So getting back into the Act 250 realm, and very excited to be here and help you guys through navigating Act 250 land.
Great, thank you.
And thank you very much. And I'll just jump right in with a few background remarks, and then we'll share with you some statistics about the housing units we've permitted and the PHP units that have not obviously been exempt and everything. But just to make the point that everybody already knows, 40,000 units by 2030, according to the VHFA, is pretty daunting, and we get that. The NRB has already been talking with legislators, the VLCT, environmental advocates, regional and local planners, housing developers, and others to be a part of this conversation and the path forward. So I say these remarks to let you know that we're being open-minded and we want to do our part to get there. I would also say that I think it's a shared responsibility that we've all had a role in somehow getting to this bad point, this crisis point, and likewise, we all need to recognize we're all part of the solution as well. We will continue to approach these conversations with the recognition that Act 250 law does need re-examination and modernization to get us there. I'm sure you're all aware that we are working on a legislative report that is due at the end of December. Necessary updates to the Act 250 program. It's due on December 31st.
Oh, no, I just,
You can, I
well,
think.
December
we're trying to
31st is time passed, so obviously.
Of 2023.
Oh, darn.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes. If it was due last December, I would have had it.
Yeah. Too bad it won't.
Yeah, so we
Done
have
earlier.
11 months, or 10 months at this point, right?
Okay.
Oh, my God, amazing.
We're making sure we have the slide deck. We're all set.
Okay, thank you. The first directive, there are 6 different directives in this report. The first one is to focus on location-based jurisdiction. And this is the regulatory framework that enables the compact growth in areas where we already have development, and while at the same time protecting our open spaces, forests, and working landscapes. And a good example of these place-based jurisdiction is the state designation programs, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but you'll hear more from Jacob about that and how we're recognized in these designated centers. The designated centers were created to target public and private investment, and most of the designations were not intended for use in a regulatory arena, but many are used for that purpose, and it's helpful to build more homes in smart locations. There's a broad stakeholder engagement program to help the Department of Housing and Conservation to evaluate and improve the designation program. They're going to be doing a report as well this year. The RPCs are working on a way to consistently map to show where we should grow and areas to protect. And as you all know, Representative Bongartz has another bill, H68, that asks, H5, that looks at the way RPCs can explore integrating municipal and regional planning policies, et cetera. These conversations are going to take time. I'm sure we'll be back and see you again, but I'm confident that the NRB as an organization can come together and help build consensus and find a way to align both state and local regulations for a better, stronger, and more equitable and sustainable communities across our state. We understand that looking at Act 250 and the role it plays has to be part of that solution. I'll take just a side step and say, that said, as you know, we are blamed many, many times for in these regulatory conversations. And I want to speak on behalf of our staff and tell you that it's not a lot of fun for them to always be the bad guy. But they work really hard to administer the law fairly, and we do issue over 400 permits a year, uncontested permits a year, and they're doing a darn good job.
Do you have figures on if something is uncontested, the average time it takes to approve?
We do track timing and how long it takes to get permits through, and by statute, we have to report that information annually in our annual report, which is due to the legislature in 2 weeks.
Yes.
February
Is it
15th,
coming
well,
up?
2.5 weeks.
So perhaps we'll have you back in that sense.
Yeah.
Just a question in terms of what you track. Do you make any attempt to track how long it takes a person who applies to prepare the material necessary to make the application, one, and two, to document the cost associated with an Act 250 permit, including the preparation time, cost, experts, and so on?
The answer to your first question, do we track how long it takes them to get their application together? As far as I know, we do not. We get the application, it's reviewed for completeness. And once, if there's information that's missing, we request that the applicant supply that, and then we deem the application complete, and it goes through a review process with our district commissions. Pete will share some information on fees that are assessed to the housing projects in the last 6 years. But we do hear that as a comment very often, that applicants need to invest in consultants and engineers, and so that they're complying with the law, but we don't keep track of.
So there's no calculation of what Act 250 actually costs to the applicants.
That's correct. Right. And obviously it differs for each applicant, to your point, right?
Would that be something you could track in the future?
I think we would have to add a question to the application, and
that might add
and then you were relying on the applicant to be sharing that information.
If you said for, our analysis, we'd like a estimate or something, is that something?
It'd certainly be an optional, not mandatory question. But one of the things that I continually hear is that the Act 250 process, in terms of the amount of time it takes, particularly for those applications that are routinely approved, is not the issue, nor is the cost of the fee the issue. The issue is all the things we have to do and the time we have to take before we're able to get an application in the first place.
To get ready. Right.
And now there's just a shortage of availability of those professionals. I mean, we also hear from those professionals saying, we want to get out of this business because this is really frustrating for us to have our expertise questioned. We're just tired and we're not going to keep engaging in this work.
My mind is going because I'm thinking maybe there may be a way to get to that, and I want to have a conversation with some folks on staff about that. So I'm hearing you, and I'll let you know. Yeah, sure. While we're talking about Act 250, as we all know, this law was written on a typewriter in the late 1960s, and it was enacted 53 years ago. And most of us don't live with typewriters anymore, and it is something that needs refreshing for the way we live today. And that is why we're excited to be embarking on this study that is due December 31st of this year. Yeah. And while we're at a crossroads of a lot of important policy decisions that are affecting housing and the livelihood of Vermonters, and I believe we need to be open to embracing changes to the Act 250 law. What they will look like, how we get there, we'll go through that whole process this year.
Are you picking up on themes already?
That's a good question. We are, no Act 250 is one of the things, but
We're here too.
Right. There's a lot of conversation about trying to not have duplicative levels of regulatory review with zoning and us. If you're a 10-acre town, if you have robust zoning and municipal ordinances, do you need Act 250? That's a conversation we've had with Mayor Weinberger. We've talked about whether the possibility of that a city like Burlington and others that have that type of robust zoning, could they be exempt from it and try it on a pilot project? I mean, there's lots of different conversations coming up, and we're trying to capture them all for that study. That'll be a lot of these things will come up in the conversation about the study is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Okay, so turning back to the omnibus housing bill, and I know you know about priority housing projects they're exempt from Act 250. There are also fee reductions for the qualified projects located within certain designated centers. And now I'd like to turn it over to Pete, who can provide you with a snapshot of where we are with housing projects over the last 6 years. Last year, we were asked to bring this information to Senate Natural Resources, and we provided all the different projects, and we've updated it and done a little bit more evaluation of it and to feed this conversation. Is what I'm trying to say.
Happy to take over. Did you want to touch base on any of this slide before we move on? Or, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
So as you know, PHVs have been exempt since 2013. We have reduced fees in the neighborhood development areas. There are no fees for the downtown designated areas, the 6086B process. And then we've been talking about the two reports. So the designated area report that you all are going to be doing and ours at the end of the year. They're both going to be kind of simultaneous, if you will.
I just want to pause and say, pertinent to what some folks have said, testified before you, I had someone from the natural resources world in the legislature come up and say, I hear it's only 3% of the cost to go through Act 250, which first of all is still a lot. And second of all, if you take that over the whole life of the project versus when you're upfront trying to get capital and, get your permits in place, that's a very different figure, so I think it's always been concerning that this conversation has lived in the Natural Resources Committee and not in the Housing Committee, because we're talking about how you get housing built and, looking at a lifetime of a project versus to get it going.
Right.
exactly. It's very different.
Right. So when Pete goes through his slides, we've got some information in there about the fees that you may or may not find surprising. But back to your point, we hear it often that the cost for applicants to get ready to apply. Yeah. So that is not captured in the fees, obviously. Right. Yeah.
But we appreciate the fee.
Every little bit helps, right? Okay.
Should I take it over?
Yeah, you want.
Yeah, so just to set the context of my next remarks here, just wanting to give you kind of the broad brush data. We're still cramming a couple of the numbers, but this is kind of a little preliminary, so you have a little understanding of the data that we have at the moment on some of these things, including PHPs. And before I get into that level of the data, I just wanted to go through kind of the flow chart on the priority housing designations. Don't be too overwhelmed by this by this slide because it has a lot of pieces to it. But I'll highlight a couple of areas that I want you to focus on or kind of walk you through this chart. And just as a precursor here, the next slide is going to be this same chart with an overlay of the bill that is under consideration of this committee, the 23 DR 91. Yeah. So at any rate, this slide just direct you first to kind of that upper left box there. You've got to determine whether your priority housing project, that's what this flow chart is dealing with. And if you look there, you can see there's 4 different designations that you need to be for your housing in order to be priority housing. It's a kind of a threshold issue. And then you go through and you decide whether you meet the mixed income, mixed use, or any combination of those two. And you can see maybe in small print there off to the right, the definitions for each of those. So nothing that we have to micro focus in on right now, but just so you're aware that those are there. If you don't meet those, you're not a priority housing project. If you are, as long as you meet the thresholds that are in the statute, and those were changed per Act 182 last year. And you can see sort of what those are, minus a little blockage there from the screen, the projection piece. But so the jurisdictional thresholds, once you reach these other portions, if you're over 10,000, you can have, in terms of your population of that town, you can have as many units as you desire in that area without triggering. You can go up to 74 if you're in that population of 6,000 to 9,999. And then the one you probably can't read there very well is less than 6,000. You can go up to 49 units. Again, if you're within those designated areas, you've got that population, then you would be you'd be a PHP. You would not trigger Act 250 jurisdiction for those projects. That's kind of the sum for that more complicated slide.
And that last part is new as of last year.
Yes, there were some changes based on the threshold limitations last year. And so this is up to date as of last year.
Can I ask a quick question? Yeah. Did you see any uptick of applications? I mean, it's only been a year.
Well, it just got approved, just went through July 1.
Okay, so we haven't had time to figure out
So
that.
we haven't digested that data, and there's fairly limited amount of time to make those projections, but it's an interesting question, something we could
Development
probably
wouldn't maybe
do.
have
Yeah.
had time to.
This is just with the priority housing project.
Yeah.
That's the only thing we did.
We just have 5 minutes, so I'm just gonna ask
Sorry.
that, you know, you go through.
Yeah.
Great. So next, just as an overview, I won't linger on this, but this is just, you can see how the bill under consideration changes this. You've got some direct lines coming down on the priority housing level. You're removing the thresholds. And I believe there's some other changes there too, but I won't linger on that, but just to give you a quick visual. Okay, so in terms of PHP tally, kind of the data that we've got, again, initially scrubbed on this from in a 6-year period, 2017 to 2022, we're talking about 2,700 priority housing projects that were exempt from Act 250 during that period. So the way we determine that is, just so you have an understanding, is folks can ask for a jurisdictional opinion from our district coordinators, and they can determine whether it is priority housing or not based on those factors that we just looked through. And
if they know it's going to be exempt, there may be some applicants that didn't ask for a jurisdictional opinion, so we can't count them. But this
we
is
don't have
a way to
data.
count them, is what I'm trying to say.
We're guessing that's a limited number of folks. The anecdotal evidence points that folks will ask for a jurisdictional opinion. But true, it does, there may be more. There may be more. And then we've got a rough breakdown here of the various districts where PHPs have been exempt from Act 250. There you can see the distribution in the various districts, and it's got the counties that represent those.
No surprise, District 4, Chittenden County is the bulk.
So now let's do that. Thank you.
Just a few more slides. So kind of the flip side to the PHP is the housing. What we tried to do in our data, and we've done this, I think, over the last couple of years, is provide kind of a corollary to the PHP projects. So we're looking at fairly large scale projects that are for multi-families. So we're not talking about duplexes and triplexes in this data. We're looking at a fair overlap of the area within those designated areas. So they comparable to what would happen in the PHP realm. That makes sense. Everybody following? I kind of think of it as like this donut, and we're around the towns, and we're talking about an area that fairly well overlaps the same areas as the PHPs. And so within that Act 250, where Act 250 has been triggered, where there isn't a PHP exemption because of either they haven't met the unit threshold or they're not actually right inside of the designated area, for instance. So any of those, we've permitted over 70 plus housing projects. We estimate that to be approximately 3,000 units. So fairly comparable again to the PHP number within the same kind of area. We've got, so within that, when you're looking at process wise, we've got about 90% that are processed as minors without any hearing going through that process, and then about 10% that are processed as majors where there is a hearing involved. And then the fees that Sabina was alluding to earlier, it's about 1.4 million in fees that were assessed for this, which comes out to about $480 per unit to cover the direct and indirect costs to the Natural Resources Board in administering. But that fee number, just so it's clear, there is a portion of the overall fee that goes to the Agency of Natural Resources. So this number reflects both of those costs and administration.
You just have a couple minutes, so I feel like I would hone in on anything that we can't see really clearly.
Okay,
Or
great.
go to concluding
Yep.
thoughts. Is that the last slide?
Yep. This is
This is it.
the last
Okay.
slide. So
Great, yeah, we might have some questions.
yeah, if you've got some questions.
Are you
happy to.
reviewing the bill and making comments directly on the bill, or?
We are doing that, but we haven't.
You haven't
Right,
finished. Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you ever look at, we are hearing about fast tracking processes in New Hampshire or other states that, are you looking at good ideas from other states about how to get housing built more quickly where we want it?
Yeah, so that's my question is, what are your ideas for helping fast track this?
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had these conversations as part of the downtown board, but
Yeah, I think
that's another part of the.
And given the urgency of the housing crisis, I mean, we could talk to you about slide after slide of information about homelessness, the number of jobs versus number of housing listings, the delays that we're already looking at, the 10-year period in which we should have already done this, to be bringing more housing online. Do you have ideas that you could share with us this year for changes based on the work you've already done?
I would say the most logical one is the designate, continuing exemptions with designated areas. Yeah.
So expanding those.
Coordinating those and
Right.
keeping the
I mean-
integrity of the designated areas with.
Mhm.
I mean, we were at a housing conference in Lamoille County last October, November, and only one of the towns in Lamoille County qualified for designated area.
Mhm.
So, and the exemption.
So do you feel
So
like,
that's a zoning.
yeah, let's say we did exempt those areas, is there anything you feel like would be significantly missing that you contribute right now to the process?
I can't answer that right off the top of my
Mm-hmm.
head, but if they're in designated areas where there's already development and there's wastewater and sewer, et cetera, and river corridors, which is already in.
So if we said there's exemptions, but these things have to be in place, that's something you could comment on to make sure that there's nothing missing that you feel like would otherwise be captured. Great. We'll take Wendy for
Super quick, are there other A&R permits that are required even when a development is exempt from Act 250? Things that the towns don't do or can't do, like stormwater, I don't know.
Yeah.
clarification.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so you can let us know what
Yeah,
those
and it-
are.
And it depends on the project.
Sure.
Right, yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to tag on to Keisha's comment, which is if you do have additional sort of low hanging fruit that coordinates with the work we're already doing. And because it would be great, I mean, you see it most closely every day, other than the developers, you are more intimately, I mean, you see what we can fix and not fix. I mean, we really, I think this is our opportunity to do some of that with our downtown and village centers.
Senator Brown.
Do you ask applicants to evaluate the process and to help you identify glitches in it?
You mean the Act 250 permit process? Yeah,
Well,
Do you get feedback from the applicants?
we get very limited feedback from the
Do you
applicants in
seek
terms of like
feedback
a
from the
survey
applicants?
kind
You
of
seek
thing.
feedback from the applicants? Do you seek feedback from the applicants in a formal process way?
Yeah, we have a opportunity to fill out a survey on our website, which rarely gets filled out. We get calls from people, but
We get calls from
yeah,
people.
Right.
yes.
no, she's very clear.
Senator
Yes.
Cummings.
I guess as we go through this, is there something you absolutely feel you should not give up? What are the most vital
Crushes, yeah.
pressures or where would something really bad happen if we tinkered with it?
And just to build on that, I mean, when we do finally get your report, it would just be nice to see it framed in kind of a sense of like aspirational goals you have, that someone doesn't need to have a lawyer to be heard, that this doesn't favor those who can afford to get through the process, that, this creates housing where we want it. And we have our one compact village settlement and it was surrounded by working lands and we've lived with that for a long time. It's great, but now I think there needs to be a next iteration of what the principles are that guide this process when we get this report.
Period, when we were afraid that all those hippies from the cities were gonna move in here and build houses everywhere
Yeah.
is over. And so it's time to look at today's reality and how do we do that?
Those hippies have to come. And
They're
they're
already
asking
here.
of the next
We're
generation.
now the oldies that wanna pull up the drawbridge around the
You can
little
say
castle we
it.
created.
And Cummings, you'll always be a hippie.
Yeah, you're the only one.
Well, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
We would really like an ongoing exchange. We're trying to
Ditto.
spend the next 2 weeks really fine tuning pieces of
Okay,
this bill.
ditto.
Yeah.
So we'll
Where we
go
were.
back and put our heads together and share what we can come back
Yeah.
with.
I think it's good that you're new, frankly, hopefully it engenders a lot of user experience development of the next wave of what Act 250 should look like.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
For having us.
Thanks.
Yeah,
So we will be back at 10:45.
Ah, okay.
10 minutes.
And I can go call this elderly woman who was very concerned about senior accessibility to affordable housing.
Sabina.